There you need the mainsail. You need the shadow of the mainsail, the blanketing effect of the mainsail to hide the spinnaker behind it, to help you drop it behind it. So you go onto a broad reach, and then instead of easing the sheet, you're going to over-trim the spinnaker. You understand that? Over-trimming the spinnaker. That means you're going to keep on winching the spinnaker inward. So this will bring the spinnaker in more behind the mainsail, partially blanketing it. Again, stay on the broad reach. You go higher on the beam reach, then the air is going to, the boat's going to accelerate, and you're going to heel over some more. So you want to stay on the broad reach, on the deep broad reach. Don't go dead downwind because you might jibe, accidentally jibe. You don't want to do that. Broad reach, over trim the spinnaker, then you're going to go forward and you're going to blow the tack of the sail. You're going to release the tack of the sail. So somebody needs to be up on the bow and release the tack of the sail, the down wall of the sail that's holding the tack up on the bow. Somebody needs to do that. Either you do it from the cockpit or you do it from the bow. But somebody needs to be on the foredeck anyway to gather the spinnaker. So you're going to blow the tack of the sail. Once you release the tack of the sail, we call it blow the tack of the sail. When you release the tack of the the spinnaker is not going anywhere because it's being held by the masthead, by the Italian, and it's being held by the strap sheet under the boom. It's not going anywhere, it's being maintained. But because you're on a broad reach, it's going to be sucked on the lee of your mainsail, completely blanketed. And then you're going to drop the spinnaker sleeve over it, and once the spinnaker sleeve is all the way down, then you're going to drop the halyard, spinnaker halyard, and drop the whole thing down either on the forecastle hatch or onto the back. But that's the safe way of dropping your spinnaker, always on the broad reach. You go onto a broad reach to lower the apparent wind on deck and to get that blanketing effect of the mainsail. And then you over-trim your spinnaker, and then you blow the tack of the sail. You release the tack of the sail. Instead of releasing the sheet, you release the tack up on the windward, on the wind side of the boat. Any questions? Yeah, I must be really clear. You understand everything? So that's to drop the spinnaker. How about jibing? You know about jibing the spinnaker? You understand jibing? Jibing is when you go from the starboard tack downwind onto the port tack like this. So the spinnaker is going to go forward on change tack all the way down. All the sails are passing suddenly from one side of the boat all the way on the other side, jibing downwind. The opposite of jibing is tacking. Tacking is when you go from the starboard tack upwind, you do it very quickly. You pass on the other tack, right? When you go try to gain upwind. Jibing is the other way. You do it downwind. You need to remember that a jibe is a slow affair. A tack is a quick thing. You want to tack as quickly as you can because you're against the wind, so the wind is going to slow down. The boat would slow down on the tack. Not on the jibe. On the jibe, you keep on being pushed, so you just take your time. So you need to take your time because there is a lot to do when you jibe. And one of the things to do is that you have to pay attention to the boom, the mainsail boom, because the boom is going to pass over your head as you are jibing. So you need to. Whenever I explain jibing, I'm always like this because I'm thinking the boom going overhead. But that's for the boom. And the easiest way to jibe the mainsail is what potentially more dangerous when you jibe because it's always at head level and it's more difficult to control because you only have the sheet there. The thing to do is to winch your main sheet in all the way flat. And then you would jibe with the traveler. And so the sail, you wouldn't allow the boom to fly from one side to the other. Suddenly it would be maintained. And it would act like a door. It'd go just like on its traveler. So that would be the safe way to do it. If you bring the sheet in all the way and leave the traveler free, you know that your mainsail is not going anywhere somehow. But it's maintained and it would jibe by itself. But the spinnaker is the problem. You got two ways of jibing the spinnaker. You could either do the forward jibe. I'm always talking about an asymmetrical sail here. A cruising chute, a Spinnaker, an MPS, an APC, which are pretty much the same sail. Because the luff is being maintained up on the bow. It's an asymmetrical sail. So I'm going to walk you through the outside jibe, which is the most common way to jibe. And then we'll do the inside jibe, which is a little bit more involved, but sometimes it's safer to do it that way. The outside jibe is when you have your asymmetrical sail and you're going to go dead downwind for a little bit. So what you need to remember about the jibe is that you need to remain dead downwind by the lee, we call that, or by the lee for a few moments. So that's up to the helmsman. And again, it's not one of those jibes, it's not a sudden affair. You need to be on a deep broad reach, where we're like 150, down to 180, dead downwind, right? Like you would be wing on wing. And then slowly get up once the spinnaker has passed forward of the boat and all the way around. And there's a lot to do there because the spinnaker being the longest sail of your boat, the lazy sheet is very long. So there is a lot to do. The outside jibe is when you allow the spinnaker to flag forward, dead downwind like this, forward of the boat. And then you need to bring on the lazy sheet all the way around. It's already being led, but you need to put it in from the cockpit. And there is a lot to do there. And most of the time, you need to pay a lot of attention to the sheets, because most of the time one of the sheets, the lazy sheet is going to fall on the water forward of the boat, and the boat's going to sail over the lazy sheet, and you're going to be screwed. And this explains why on the Spinnaker gear on most racing boats is always covered with anti-fouling paint, because it always falls forward of the boat. So the thing you need to remember, you need to pick up the lazy sheet and always pay a lot of attention to it, and never allow it to get in the water. So you need somehow to almost, not manually, but you need to maintain that sheet off the water all the time. And that takes a long time because the lazy sheet, the clue, if you think about this looking from the masthead, your spinnaker that you are jibing would do 3/4 of a turn, would invert itself but forward 270 degrees, 3/4 of a turn, right? So that's the outside jibe. It takes a long time to do it. You have to pay a lot of attention to the lazy sheet. Otherwise, you would screw it up. Even on wide racing, they do it all the time. And this is why this is easy to find on some racing pictures, or beautiful pictures of boats with the big spinnakers setting out. On the tack of the sail at the end of the bowsprit, if you look at the tack of the spinnaker, there is a little 45 degrees ergot, there's a piece of batten sticking up. And this is to receive the lazy sheet, their lazy sheet, to prevent the lazy sheet from falling forward on the bowsprit. So that's a problem they have very, very often.
What do you call that thing that sticks up?
I would put it on ergot. I mean, well, what is it, the official term? I'm not exactly sure. I mean, it's usually a piece of batten that's being swaged in there. You know, I guess the jibe preventer. What would you call it? I'm not exactly sure.
Excuse me. Are we going to be covering symmetrical spinnakers or only asymmetrical?
I'm doing asymmetrical here, but because this is most common, but we could cover symmetrical as well. The big difference with symmetrical, the jibing with symmetrical spinnakers is that you have to have, the easiest way is to have split 2 spinnaker poles, but that means to have 2 spinnaker pole topping lift, 2 spinnaker pole downhaul, and 2 spinnaker poles after guys, so that's a lot of gear. But the conventional spinnaker, symmetrical spinnaker, doesn't invert itself on the jibe. It just goes from one side of the boat to the other side of the boat. Asymmetrical spinnakers, there is more to do because you have to invert the thing. There is more maneuvering to do. The inside jibe, now bear with me here. The inside jibe, instead of having the sail do 270 degrees, 3/4 of a turn, we're going to have the sail do that last 90 degrees. We're going to have the sail go through between the gap between its own luff, right? The spinnaker is being held from its halyard up there down to the bow to at the end of the bowsprit. So there is a gap there between the luff of the spinnaker and the furled sail on the headstay. There is a gap there. So we're going to force the spinnaker through there. But in order to be able to achieve that, you must not allow the sail to flag forward like you did on the outside jibe. If you allow the sail to flag forward, you let it go all the way, then you're going to have to bring it in all the way and back in through the gap. So here's the better way. As you're entering the jibe, and again the jibe is a slow thing, you're entering the jibe, you go all the way down, dead downwind, you're going to let go the working sheet of the spinnaker, which will become the lazy sheet on the other side. You're going to let go the working sheet until the clue of your spinnaker is this far forward of the headstay, right? So either you look it, you slack it up, look, or either that, or you already have a mark on your sheet, a mark which would be pretty much the length of your boat. So you do it if you're single-handed, you do it from your cockpit and you slide the thing off until that mark, that piece of magic, the piece of duct tape or a piece of black magic marker, until you see that mark getting to the clip, to the winch, clack. You know that once you've reached that mark, the clue is this far forward of your furled sail, of your head sail. Then you go on the other side of the cockpit, what will become the working side of the cockpit, which is still the lazy sheet side of the cockpit, and you pull up on the lazy sheet as much as you can. Now, the lazy sheet will have to be led forward of the third sail inside its own luff, right? You have to lead the lazy ship inside the gap because you want to do the inside jibe. So you're going to pull on the lazy sheet as much as you can until you've reached the same mark that's on that sheet. Once you have cleated the lazy sheet, which will become the working sheet on the new side of the cockpit, the clue of the spinnaker is being held by the two sheets forward of the head sail, forward of the third sail. It's not going anywhere. And then you need to go back, and then you need to finish, you need to complete the jibe. So you can aim up a little bit, and down to 150, up to 150 degrees, from 180 to 150 degrees. And you're going to let go what used to be the working sheet, which is now the lazy sheet. So you need to go back into the other side of the cockpit, release it all the way, and then go back to the new working side of the cockpit and force the sail through that gap. And that's the inside jibe. A little more involved to do, but if you, and also it works with a flat sail. It doesn't work with one of those full running, very light sail. You might get wine glass when you do this because you're trying to invert the sail. Was that clear enough?
Yep.
So that's the inside jibe. The outside jibe, the inside jibe. But the other way to do it, and this is what we used to do in the Whitbread a long time ago, down in the big south and the great south, is that to jibe, we would drop the spinnaker sleeve, my spinnaker sleeve, we would snub the spinnaker down, seize it, do whatever we had to do to jibe, get it onto the other jibe, and then once the boat was set on the other jibe, then we would raise the spinnaker sleeve again. So that's a very fine way of doing it too. You're single-handing. If you snuff the thing down, you douse it. That's also a very good way of doing it. It takes a longer time, but that's what it is. Now, let's talk about one of my products here. This is called the Tacker. Have you ever seen this? The Tacker is, this goes over the furl head sail, and you attach the tack of your asymmetrical spinnaker to it, like this. This goes like this. The tack of your spinnaker is attached here. And this is around your furl head sail like this. The downhaul, what's being held to hold down to control the height of your tack, will be held here, inside that belt here. The tacker will slide even on the load over the furl head sail. So that's a nice thing to have. So it gives you a good element of control onto the tack of your asymmetrical sail. So that's for the tack. Now for the top up there, the best thing to have is one of those spinnaker sleeves, like what I do, in order to control the spinnaker. Again, the big deal with the spinnaker is not to pull it up, it's to bring it back in. That's what the spinnaker sleeve is for. Any questions? The big deal, another big difference between a running spinnaker, conventional spinnaker, and an asymmetrical spinnaker is that the symmetrical spinnaker is 180 degrees of your J. The J is the length of your fore triangle from the forward of the mast all the way up to the end, where the headstay hits the deck. That's what we call the J, J like Juliet. And the maximum width of your conventional spinnaker would be 180% of that, 1.8 times that. And an asymmetrical spinnaker, like a cruising chute, MPC, MPS, APC, would be typically 165%. So right there you see, oh, okay, so it's a slightly narrower sail. It's still a huge sail, but it's narrow. But again, it's not the fact that it's narrower, it's mostly the fact that it's much flatter. It's a much flatter sail, and the fact that it's being much flatter allows you to go much higher onto the wind.
If you're doing the jibe approach, where
Yeah.
you pull down the sleeve and
Yeah.
then jibe and put it back up again, I'm guessing you wouldn't let loose the tack on the sail.
No,
Yeah, so you're able to bring down the sleeve without undoing the tack.
no, the tack remains where it's at.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
The
you
tack's
must-
not going anywhere.
And so you must, let loose the sheet or something
Yes.
so that it can come down?
That's correct, yes. In that case, what you would let down, you would ease the sheet down enough for the spinnaker sleeve to be almost all the way down.
And how do you pull the chute down at that point? You have to go up to the.
You gotta be up on the foredeck, yeah. You gotta be on the foredeck, yeah.
You don't put a block or anything down there?
No, a lot of the guys who do the Vendée Globe and around the world, the single-handers, we've tried for the longest time to be able to do that from the cockpit. On the J-boat too, I've tried also to use the spinnaker sleeve from the cockpit. It's doable, but it adds a lot of complication to the system. It adds a lot of chafing. It adds a lot of, the control line of the Spinnaker sleeve becomes much longer on it because the Spinnaker sleeve is a closed loop like this. So you have to have the closed loop that would go onto a double block somewhere forward and then go all the way back to the cockpit, and there's lots of opportunity for it to snag on things. And it adds a lot of chafing onto the system. So it's never really a good system.
But your system of pulling in the sheet and releasing the tack when you're bringing it down
Yes,
at the end,
yes.
then it's much easier to pull it down because you can be back in the cockpit.
You don't want to be back in the cockpit. If you deal with the Spinnaker, you deal with the sleeve, you need to be on the foredeck anyway. So ultimately, that's what it is. Because once you've doused the Spinnaker sleeve, your next immediate move is to remove the whole affair, to drop the Spinnaker sleeve, to drop the Spinnaker halyard, and remove everything and put everything below deck or on its back, away. So somebody needs to be on the foredeck anyway. So, any questions? One thing about the Spinnaker sleeve, some of you might have it on your boat already. The Spinnaker sleeve, once you have hoisted the Spinnaker sleeve and the Spinnaker starts to fill, the control line that you are controlling, because you've just hoisted the Spinnaker sleeve and the Spinnaker starts to fill, once the Spinnaker is filled and you are sailing with the Spinnaker set, you need to go back and look at the control line of the Spinnaker sleeve and make sure that they are slackened. The control line, the up haul of the Spinnaker sleeve that you use to hoist the Spinnaker sleeve, there must be some element of slack on it as you are sailing. So a little bit later, when the Spinnaker is full and you are sailing on the Spinnaker with the Spinnaker sleeve up, you need to go back up there by the mast step or wherever you put it. That up haul it's not just a halyard that remains taut. That up haul needs to be slackened. And this is why the best spot for the control line of the Spinnaker sleeve is to lash them loosely onto the lifeline, halfway up and down the fore triangle, away from shrouds. Because the lifeline have an element of give on it. You want that. There's got to be some functional play up there. Otherwise, you would generate chafing, and we don't want that. Questions, please? So that's for the Spinnaker. We could talk about multi-hull if you want to, single-handing. Would you like to talk about single-handing? I love to talk about single-handing. I miss single-handing.
Single-handing would be great.
Can you cover the symmetrical Spinnaker?
Well, the symmetrical Spinnaker is just a bigger sail that you have to have the Spinnaker pole all the time.
Yeah.
That's why they're not that popular anymore. Because you need the Spinnaker pole all the time, and it's more of a running sail, so you're somewhat limited. You can use it from a beam reach down to a broad reach, down to a dead run. So you can do more with an asymmetrical sail. So this is pretty much why the symmetrical sail no one carries them anymore.
So even for racing?
You do? Yeah, for racing, yeah.
For racing you use still the symmetrical?
Yeah, for racing you do, yeah, for running, yeah.
I just have to switch.
I mean, that's what you have, that's right.
And you always use the sheet, holding it, you don't fasten the sheet on the asymmetrical Spinnaker, you fasten the sheet.
If I fasten the
You
sheet,
always hold the sheet by hand and never tie it down.
what do you mean, while racing?
When you're running with your Spinnaker, your
Yes.
Spinnaker. Somebody said you should never fasten it down.
Well, what are you going to do, sit down and hold it all the time? I mean, it depends if you're fully crewed on racing, then okay. Then everyone's going to have a single role to do. Somebody's going to be steering, somebody's going to be holding the sheet, somebody's going to be grinding, somebody's going to be doing, but if you're cruising around or if you're single-handing, you have to set the thing down. You have to leave it there. But this is more of a, modern boats are much quicker than older boats used to be. But what I'm getting at here is that this is something we learned with multi-hulls, for example. Those very fast multi-hulls on open 60s that we have now. You set the sails. You don't sit there and play with it like this. No, you don't. You set the sail, and then you aim the boat that way. The boat is set. You don't trim, like you would do on a small monohull or while racing around the buoy. I mean, you guys on the Great Lakes have a slightly different program. You don't test, but you just set the sail, you clit it, then you're done with it. Or you're done with it. You keep an eye on it. the sails are set on tune.
And an asymmetrical spinnaker, how far above the pole should you have the tack, and how far off the mast should you have the head?
His question is that on an asymmetrical spinnaker, how far up off the deck should the tack be, and how far off the mast should the head be? As far as the head is concerned, the head should be right up to the masthead, period. There is just a few times where you should ease the spinnaker halyard, when you're on a ridge, and if you have a fractional rig boat. Because on a fractional rig boat, the mainsail sometimes hides the spinnaker. So on a ridge, on a fractional rig boat, you, in some instances, you would slack the halyard a little bit to move the spinnaker head away from the mainsail in order to get a bigger gap there, in order to get more air on the masthead. But that's the only reason why. So as a common rule, you don't. You just hoist the thing up all the way up to the top and leave it there. The tack, then it's more important to tune the tack of the sail, because by raising the tack, by easing the tack or lowering the tack, you're going to change the shape of the luff of the sail. On the closer windage you want to be with an asymmetrical sail, with a Spinnaker, with an APS, with an APC, with the cruising chute, the closer to the wind you want to be, the tighter the luff of the sail should be. Therefore, you're going to winch the tack down. On the tack, at that moment, if the sail is designed for your boat, the tack should be right at the same level as the lifeline. If you have a bowsprit, like a J-boat, those modern boats, racing boats, at the end of the bowsprit, the tack is going to be there maxed out all the way down to the end of the bowsprit. Although you don't really play with it much at all. The lower off the wind you want to be, the lower reach you want to be, like on a broad reach or 150 degrees, then you're going to be slackening the tack line, the downhaul. But the maximum height it could be would be like a couple of feet above your lifeline. It will never be higher than that, because Spinnaker wouldn't look good anymore.
The bowsprit, you always keep that out
Yeah.
all the way.
Yeah, all the way, because the sail has been designed like that. The idea with the bowsprit, again, the bowsprit is more of a modern boat approach, like multi-horse, like J-boat, because those boats are lighter and faster and quicker. The fact of having a bowsprit, you don't need a Spinnaker pole anymore. The fact of putting a bowsprit, the idea with the bowsprit is that you increase that J, you increase that 4 triangle lengths. You suddenly have, not suddenly, but you then have a much larger 4 triangle, therefore you have a much larger body of water, body of air going through your 4 triangle. So on the Spinnaker legs, the Spinnaker legs will have open air. And also the Spinnaker are larger, much bigger, because you have a bigger J. So it's 180% of that new J with the bowsprit. So the Spinnaker is much larger. But those boats, you're going dead downwind like this, wing on wing. I mean, this is how Christopher Columbus got here, right? I mean, this is how you sail across Atlantic. You know, thousands of people do that all the time, and it's great. But it's not a very efficient way to go sailing. If you do any kind of racing dead downwind, except way down in the south, in the Southern Ocean, or in very heavy weather, when it's blowing more than 35 or 45 knots of wind, you end up like this. Of course you do. But if you got like 15 knots or 20 knots of air on your racing, then you should really be jibing downwind. Jibing downwind.
In a racing situation, if you want to raise your Spinnaker before you have your genoa down, but you got one sheet winch on each side of the boat, any suggestions on how you...
Okay, on a racing situation, if you want to hoist your genoa before dropping your Spinnaker.
Or either way, or hoist the Spinnaker before furling the genoa, because you don't want to have,
You don't want to lose power for
exactly.
a little while there. Yeah.
But you got one sheet winch on each side, so
Right.
you haven't freed up the winch from the genoa yet, but you got any ideas for how you...
Well, there's ways out there, but you have to be one of those old-fashioned sailors and use those biting knots,
Okay.
I personally don't recommend it. I mean, if you're in racing mode, then you need to free up the winch. Well, you need to have some sort of that's why snatch blocks are for. You would take another snatch block, and you would lead another line, and you would lead it somewhere. You would need to do something like this. Personally, I don't recommend it, especially if you have a Spinnaker sleeve up there on your Spinnaker. If you single-handed, you don't. If you're single-handing, you don't. When you single-hand, you do one thing at a time. You don't do 2 or 3 things at the same time, because it's all going to mess up at some point. So you do one thing at a time. So you're gonna take care of the spinnaker, you're gonna put it away, especially if you have a water furler on the spinnaker sleeve up there. If you start to unfurl your genoa with the spinnaker sleeve up, much probably the control line of the spinnaker sleeve is gonna get hooked up on the water furler swivel up there, and you're gonna end up with a huge mess. So the short answer is no, you will not. If you want to really get if you're racing, maybe you don't have a roller furler, then you could still hoist the jenny, but most boats have roller furlers nowadays. Right? So I don't really have a ready answer for you. Short of being on the boat, they used to use those big pair of pliers, those that you snap on, vice grips that you would, the old times, you'd get the vice grip and you would lock the sheet just after the turning block. So then you could free the winch because the vice grip would prevent the sheet from being fed. So that's one way to do it.
You're talking about kiwi drops or Mexican drops?
No, I can't really speak of Mexican drop. I think I know what it is. The kiwi drop is a windward drop on the jibe. During the jibe, you will do it. So I don't exactly know. No. I'm not a round the buoy, fully crewed sailor. I've done some of it, but very quickly I went into multi-hull and into single-handed, which I find more gratifying. So no, I can't really speak of the kiwi drop or the Mexican drop. No, sorry. That's more of a transpac thing. Yeah.
If you predict the level of the tack, you recommend just having a fixed line or an adjustable line?
Adjustable.
Yeah.
Right? The tack of the spinnaker, the tack of the cruising spinnaker, you should be able to adjust it. Yeah, you need a tack line. You need a tack line anyway because at some point you need to release the thing. Even if you have a bow spread, especially if you have a bow spread, because the bow spread you can reach out there, so you have to have some sort of line that comes back to a cleat or to a winch or to the cockpit. So no, a fixed pennant is not the right way to deal with the tack of the spinnaker. You have to have that ability of adjusting it, a proper downhole, let's call it.
But you don't recommend having a line for the sleeve, pull the sleeve down? So you can adjust the tack and you can pull the sleeve down from the cockpit?
No, I don't recommend doing it from the cockpit because it complicates matters a lot and it's prone to get stuck. It's
too much stuff.
Yeah, too much stuff. Again, we tried quite a few times to do it on those Vendée Globe guys, single-handed boats, and it always ends up being too iffy on it. We really haven't found a proper way. You want to deal with the spinnaker, you need to be forward. That's the best to do it. And as a matter of fact, it's one of those things too that I personally, I don't like to have things coming back, everything coming back to the cockpit. It could be done on a nice way, especially on those newer boats where they have all those lines coming down from the mast. Again, those Vendée Globe boats, because they have everything coming down on the central gutter on the middle of the boat, and all those lines are coming in there and through all those winches. But there's no getting around. That's very nicely done, and it's nice if you don't have to get out of the cockpit to reef your mainsail or so. But personally, I like to be by the mast step to reef the mainsail and to deal with halyards. On our conventional boats that we have around here, when people say, "Oh, it's nice, I can do everything from the cockpit," well, even though that sounds good, most of the time you end up having a board of spaghetti in your cockpit. You end up having all those lines coming in, and you don't know what's what, and it's a mess. I reckon it's much better to get out of the cockpit, to do something, take the reef or do whatever you're going to do, by the mast step on the halyards, and not bring everything back to the cockpit for the sake of clarity. Otherwise, you end up with a bunch of spaghettis on plus the fact of saying that, no, you must never get out of the cockpit. I mean, come on, guys. I mean, get a powerboat, you know. I mean, that's one big argument. I don't get upset about it, but this is why we don't get any growth in our business, in our marine sailing business over here. Because all those magazines and all those stories that you hear, they always instill fear into the potential sailor. You know, don't get out there. Always put your life jacket on. Make sure you call the Coast Guard. The sailing is being seen as a dangerous thing to do. which it could be. I mean, anything is a dangerous thing to do, right? Climbing a mountain is a dangerous thing to do. But sailing, the average of sailing that we enjoy doing is just a very pleasant affair to do, right? This is why we like to go sailing. Now, this is why you should use your Spinnaker, but you need help for your Spinnaker, and we're here to help. And it's called, let me talk about one thing here, which is going around the industry lately, on my industry of Spinnaker handling, which is that those top-down furlers that we keep hearing about it. We keep hearing about it, those top-down furlers that you could do it from the cockpit, you could leave the sail up and stuff, and you could treat your Spinnaker like you would treat a genoa or a jibe, or you would. I hate them. It's not foolproof. It's not 100% foolproof, those top-down furlers. You need a lot to set up. It's a complicated thing to do. It's doable, but it's a complicated thing to do. It's an expensive thing to do. They're very expensive. They cost like 4 times the price of my sleeve. I've made 25,000 sleeves. The sleeve works. We made sleeves with 12,000 square foot Spinnakers. Oh, they work. You've got to pay lots of attention. You don't use them every day, true. But the furler, the idea of the furler, you're limited of an angle of using it. You're limited in light air. I don't think, I'm 100% sure it doesn't work in heavy air. Because when you're dealing with your Spinnaker on the cockpit, on the foredeck, if you have 50 knots of wind on deck, there you are with 50 knots of air, it's blowing 25 knots up there. And the thing's starting to furl from the masthead. And it's a very complicated thing to do, very expensive to. The torque rope has to transmit the turn from the furler up on the bow somewhere, all the way up to 50 feet or 60 feet, whatever, up to the masthead up there. And sometimes you have to pre-wound that furler 50 or 60 times before it starts turning up there. And once it starts turning up there, okay, good, it starts turning, finally, you're sweating bullets down here on the thing, and you look at it, okay, it's starting to furl. So as it starts to furl up there, then the sail area at the masthead is being diminished very quickly, so it becomes much easier to furl. The torque rope that's been wounded like 50 turns is suddenly unwinding itself up there. So suddenly the Spinnaker has been all gathered up, like thrashing. Meanwhile, at the bottom there, the furler, it's 2 different speeds of turning. On the bottom of the Spinnaker, which is the tight cloth, is being furled at the bottom at the same time too. And you end up with a big bubble in the middle. Not all the time, but it's not a foolproof thing, the top-down furl. Pro furl is going, the spin deck, they call it, is going towards trying to solve that by having those balls on the roll furler. You've seen that top-down furler with balls on it. The idea is to insulate the torque down from the Spinnaker. So inside those balls, the torque rope can do whatever it wants. It will never grab the sail. That's the idea with all those balls that they have. So that's one step in the right direction, but it's still not foolproof. But it takes it's a very expensive, complicated thing to do. It's doable again. They're all trying to do it, but I don't think they're there. You need to have very good radio tension. And you need to have the control line coming back to the cockpit or wherever you want to. That also needs to be paid lots of attention to. So it's very complicated. So I reckon they're not there yet. I gotta go. My booth number is 420. So it's halfway up in there. I also do a bass climber, something to go up the mast on your own. I do single-handed stuff, short-handed. If you're then on a wife on the boat, you are a typical customer. You need my help. So come and talk to me. Thank you very much. I hope you learned something. I got brochures.